It's licensed games all the way down as the Capcom chronology continues. Here's 5 reasons. Hi there, I'm Roger Retrogaming Puppet, and this is 5 Reasons. This is our third go-round with Nintendo's 16-bit behemoth, and being as we're in the middle of a Capcom chronology here, you can probably guess what the theme is. Capcom was strong in the Nintendo camp during the 4th generation of console games. They published only 6 games on the Sega Genesis across all territories and published not a single one on NEC's TurboGrafx or Turbo Duo. On the Super NES though, well over 30 games in all territories. But Capcom's a pretty good steward of their legacy, and of those 30 plus, only a small handful remain exclusive to the platform. Their big breakthrough in the system was of course Street Fighter II, a game that is still among their 10 best-selling of all time, but they also released several Mega Man games, including perhaps the ill-advised Mega Man Soccer, which we've already covered in a previous installment here, as well as many arcade ports like King of Dragons and Captain Commando. And as you'll see here, they continued to work their Disney magic, something they started in the 8-bit age. Yet even some of those games got ports anyway, a rarity for licensed games, but Capcom released all of the Magical Quest games and Aladdin on the Game Boy Advance. As is often the case, it's licenses that prevent games from being re-released or ported, and these are 5 licensed entries. You know, in fact, you could say that 4 of the 5 these days are Disney games. Yeah, how about that? Anyways, without further ado, here's 5 Capcom reasons to own a Super NES. Let's get this one out of the way right away. It's a football game, and not an especially good one. I was kinda hoping for an arcadey feel like Super High Impact, Football Frenzy, or Tecmo Bowl, but nope. This is Capcom's answer to Madden, complete with NFL license. Before that was the exclusive domain of EA, though it does lack a license from the Players Association, so it has real teams, but no real pros. It was only released in the US, and it wasn't even developed in-house. Equilibrium handled this one, and if you don't know who that is, they did the Game Boy Swamp Thing game, if that gives you an idea. I mean, it's much better than that, and I guess it's not terrible for a 16-bit gridiron game, but unless you're a huge football fan or are out to collect every Capcom game ever made, you can probably skip this one. Yeah, look, I needed a 5th entry to round this list out, okay? But, you know, if you are trying to catch all the Capcom games on the Super NES, at least this one is cheap. The X-Men have been in a lot of video games. Some are very bad, like Game Master's Legacy on the Game Gear. Some are very good, like X-Men 2 on the Genesis. Mutant Apocalypse doesn't quite get to that level, but it is definitely on the good side of the spectrum. Mutant Apocalypse was either Capcom's first or second X-Men game, depending on where you live, as it came out after Children of the Atom hit Japanese arcades, but before it arrived in North America. At any rate, this game is a 2D beat-em-up akin to something like Ninja Warriors. While Sega's games were much more platform-based with fairly quick combat, this game has relatively little platforming and a lot of brawling with enemies that take a lot more damage. It starts with 5 stages, 1 per playable hero, with the 5 being Cyclops, Gambit, Wolverine, Beast, and Psylocke. Then it moves into stages presented linearly, but you can still choose which mutant you want to use. Each character has special moves and feels unique, but it's easy to get surrounded by enemies, and the pace is a bit slow, especially when compared with Sega's Genesis efforts. Still, it's far from terrible. If you're an X fan, I definitely recommend you check it out. This is the game that Spider-Man X-Men wishes it was. And hey, look at that, it's not very expensive either. It'll cost you around 15 bucks these days for a bare cart. Yep, the Disney afternoon continued to get games into the Super NES era. Now Bonkers is a cartoon I have almost no memory of, but Capcom got a decent game out of it, and one that is completely different from Sega's internally developed Genesis game. The SNES game is a fairly standard hop and bop platformer, with Bonkers also being able to collect bombs to use on enemies. Now the story is that a couple two-tree Disney artifacts have been stolen from a museum in Hollywood, and Bonkers is on the case. What makes this game a bit unique is that Bonkers has a dash meter, and that's a pretty big mechanic. Now he can only use it when it's full, and then he has to wait for it to recharge, but unlike a lot of platformers of the era, running into enemies can damage them. The game is also beautiful, like most of Capcom's Disney output. Oh, and it does the thing X-Men does with the selectable stages, although you obviously only play as Bonkers. If platformers are your thing and you're looking for ones you might have missed, then I would definitely say to check out Bonkers. This one is on the pricier side of the affordable spectrum, going for between 20 and 30 bucks for a bare cart, but hey, it ain't too bad, ain't it? This one is a pseudo-sequel to Mutant Apocalypse, but coming in late 1996, after the 5th generation was in full swing, it honestly feels a little phoned in. At its base, it's a lot like Mutant Apocalypse, but it feels much more sluggish. The controls are less responsive, and the level design is even less inspired, with a lot of stages involving breaking columns for some reason. It also adds some really ill-advised underwater sequences, which are timed because breathing is a thing, even for Iron Man, which is weird. The biggest mistake this game makes, though, is that now any character can play any of the initial selectable stages, which means that really none of the stages are made with any of the character's abilities in mind. Also, the Hulk just doesn't feel like the Hulk, and it's like a Superman game over here. They make him much weaker than he's ever been in comics just so game mechanics work the way they want them to work. And if you're going to do that, just use a different hero. It's not like the Avengers has a small roster. After Mutant Apocalypse, this one feels like a bit of a letdown, and with it being the most expensive game on this list, coming between 30 and 40 bucks in the current aftermarket, I'd only recommend picking it up if you really love that X-Men game and want more of it. Ah yes, more Disney Afternoon please. This was one of Shinji Mikami's first games at Capcom, and while it's not Resident Evil, it definitely shows the quality he'd come to be known for. While you might expect a platformer, this one is actually an overhead character-based puzzle game. Think something like Kickle Cubicle and you're on the right track, but this game is a lot more complex. Each stage in Goof Troop is made up of single-screen encounters, not unlike the original Legend of Zelda. As Max, or Goofy, or both, you have to navigate through the various screens to get key items and advance to a boss in your quest to save Pete and PJ. It's not a hard game by any means, but it's a fun one, and it's at its most fun when you got a friend to play with. Then hey, this one is pretty cheap as well, don't expect to pay more than 20 bucks for it. And that does it for me, but don't worry, I'll be back again before the Capcom Chronology is over with another installment of obscure old games. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you then.